I can see a chute just as a cattle will because that's something my autism lets me do.
You wacko.
I know my system will work because I've been through it 1,000 times in my head.
What do you see when you think about being excluded because you were a woman?
Oh, I see bull testicles put on my vehicle. That scene in the movie actually happened.
It did.
Yeah. Being a woman in a man's industry in the 1970s was a much bigger barrier than autism ever was. And now things are really different. There's lots of women now in the cattle industry. Lots and lots of them now.
Yeah. I love it. That was an incredible scene, by the way.
And that actually happened.
I can't even imagine.
In the 1970s, Temple Grandin, an autistic female working in an entirely male-dominated world of livestock handling, single-handedly improved the industry, so much so that today, major corporations won't use vendors who do not meet her standards, and half of the cattle in the country are raised in facilities that she's designed. Temple continues to teach, write, and speak about improving our world. Here's part 2 of our recent 4-part interview with Temple Grandin.
People working with animals need to recognize things like, what are the ears doing? What is your animal attending to? Be a good observer.
In a lot of the talks I'm doing now, I talk about the visual thinkers like me who think in pictures. See, an animal is a sensory-based thinker, so if you think in pictures, it's easy to understand how an animal might think. And when you just think in words, things tend to get way too theoretical. You see, as a visual thinker, I'm a bottom-up thinker. So I start thinking about how do you implement something.
And I love that concept because our organization, we bring out school children and we try to start with them very young and we introduce them into nature and to animals and empathy for animals. And that's so important to me. And I know it is for you as well. So how do you see that working? Do you think more organizations should be working towards things like that?
Well, and I'm going to talk it more in generalities, things I've learned. Is where people get in trouble, they get too big, gets out of control.
Okay.
The other thing is cost cutting to the point where things go really wrong. Mm-hmm. That happens in all kinds of industries, all kinds of enterprises.
My organization started on just 10 acres of property across my street from my home, and just because we're growing doesn't mean we're getting better. And so I would love to pick your brain on some of those things.
I get very concerned about things growing too fast. Mm-hmm. There was a very bad example of a person who was raising some dairy calves, doing an absolutely beautiful job of raising dairy calves. Then he expanded and started a facility in another state. So he was no longer on the site, and the place in the other state was a mess because he was no longer there to manage it. When it comes to my animal work, when I was in my 20s, I thought I could fix everything with engineering and equipment.
Okay.
And what I've learned is you can only fix half the problems with equipment. Common mistake that's often made, and I've seen this made in education too, think, well, we get these new computers, we get this smart board, we get this, we get that. That's going to fix everything. That doesn't replace good teaching. You know, the fanciest facility doesn't replace the management side of things.
Especially some of that factory farming work that you are so famous for.
Well, the thing I've worked on the most has been livestock handling. And that's a thing that's really improved. Big buyers drive change. And I don't care if it's animals or it's clothing. The clothing industry is another industry that's got real serious problems.
Okay, I want to hear about that.
Well, how about a factory that burnt up and killed 100 people sewing blue jeans?
Oh.
Yeah, really bad. And in some of the work I did with large buyers of meat, I watched reactions that were like that show Undercover Boss.
Okay.
When vice president level executives got out and saw some bad stuff, animal welfare went from an abstraction that you delegate to legal or the PR department to something real. Going, yes, there's some things here that are really bad and we need to change it. But on the other hand, some of the activists have said everything's terrible, and that wasn't true either. But there were things that needed to be changed. And I did a lot of this work back in 1999 when McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's, I worked on implementing those programs. And I saw more change in a 6-month period than I'd seen in a 25-year career prior to that. And most of the places didn't have to be rebuilt. They just had to have repairs, non-slip flooring, supervision and training, and removal of 3 plant managers out of about 75 plants.
I think everyone in the animal welfare world rejoiced when McDonald's hired you as a consultant. I mean, what a step to moving forward, right? That would
Well,
never
and
happen.
the thing that made it work was, when you get vice president level executives out. In fact, McDonald's has got the person I worked for, Bob Langert, has a book. It's called The Battle to Do Good, and he has an entire chapter on the work that I did on the livestock facilities.
One thing when I started 15 years ago, I had to overcome the kind of crazy animal person file. Everybody thought the advocates were so extreme and crazy that I couldn't really get anything done. Like I went to the sheriff's department, who was not really taking animal cruelty cases very seriously, but I realized it's because these advocates were pushing a little too hard and not trying to come up with
the other thing is scientific research shows very clearly there's a link between domestic violence and cruelty to animals. That has been documented.
That's right. And so can you speak a little more to that? Because that's one of the main things we do when we teach law enforcement about animal cruelty. It's so important.
Well, and there's been, all the terrible videos that have shown up online. And I remember one horrendous video about 20 years ago, a guy beating the sows up with a gate rod. And they later found out that he was also beating up his wife. And he'd get so angry at the sow over just nothing. She'd start to move for him, and he'd just take the gate rod and keep whacking her. And I found out later on that he'd gotten in trouble for domestic violence, too.
Well, and what we teach is that if you can get these people early on with an animal abuse charge, it puts them on the radar, and it does sometimes prevent them from doing it to their wife or their children.
Well, it's one of the things I've learned with lots of people handling animals, like lots of cattle or lots of animals, is there's certain people that should not be handling animals.
Yeah.
Absolutely should not be. They enjoy being mean to them.
That's right.
And I was out on construction crews when we were installing equipment in large cattle operations. And when you were a construction worker, you were invisible. And they do stuff in front of you. That was really bad. And there's always one ringleader. The other employees sometimes just didn't know, how to react. And you have to get rid of that person. And I'm going to guess in some of the work I've done, some of the large meat plants and some other big places, there's about 10% of the people you need to get rid of. It's just that simple.
It's got to be difficult to find people that are both compassionate and work in these places.
Well, the other thing is don't understaff and overwork.
That's right.
That's really, really essential. And you have strict rules, real strict thou shalt nots. And I have written some of those guidelines. And it's made very clear that if you do some of those thou shalt nots, you will be fired.
And you talk about, too, having cameras in some of these places.
Yep, and that's made a difference. That has made a difference, and those cameras in the successful programs have been audited by outside observers that log in from a remote location. But cameras are not going to replace all the supervision. When COVID went on, they said, we can do some of these welfare audits, just on cameras. No, you cannot totally replace on-the-ground live inspections. But one thing the cameras do that's really good is it solves that problem of acting good when they see the person with the clipboard.
Check out part 3 of our interview, where Temple offers her unique perspective and advice about visual thinkers and getting results by accepting the need to embrace different minds. And for more information about Temple, go to templegrandin.com. For more information about Aliqua, go to aliqua.org. I'm Laurie Hood. Thanks for listening.